Hi all, welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. Today, I'm joined by Anikó Szombati, Chief Digital Officer at the Hungarian Central Bank, or in Hungarian, Magyar Nemzeti Bank. Welcome to my show, Anikó.
Hello, good afternoon.
Well, I'm honored to have you here discussing these very interesting topics that we're going to talk about. But I think we need to go to the very beginning. Could you please tell our listeners a bit more about the Hungarian National Bank? Like, for example, when was it created? What are its main objectives?
Okay, so the Central Bank of Hungary has been established in 1924. So we are starting to prepare for our 100th anniversary. And the predecessor of this institution was the Austro-Hungarian Central Bank, governing the monetary issues of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. But following the First World War and all these settlements, when the independent countries has been established, sooner or later, the independent central bank of Hungary was also established.
Well, thank you very much for sharing these general ideas with me and with all my listeners. Today, I would like to focus our discussion on two main areas. The first one would be the Hungarian National Bank's digitalization agenda, and the other one would be central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. So I'm going to start with the digitalization agenda. And I think I should start by asking you, how is the Hungarian National Bank embracing digitalization and fintech innovation?
So actually, it's quite a long story, because the Central Bank of Hungary has always had its own way to think about the financial stability of the banking sector and the financial sector overall. And within this realm, we started to think about how could we enhance the competitiveness of the banking sector. And we had to realize that, especially in the retail banking area, neither the market competition nor the customer awareness or the push from the customers went deep enough to enhance or to force the banking digitalization, and our customers had to pay quite high fees for all those services that with digitalization could have become more cheaper, more available. So that we started to look around how could we exactly promote this area. And the central bank management came to the conclusion that we need a dedicated central bank area that is empowered with the task to promote the digital transformation of the financial sector, and of course, parallel to it, to promote the safe spread of fintech innovation and the possible cooperation between the incumbent sector and the fintech sector could be the fastest and the more effective way for the digital transformation. And on top of that, we also got involved in the digital transformation of the central bank itself, meaning that all these digitalization ideas could enhance the central bank's performance as well. And within this area, of course, central bank digital currencies are one of our flagship projects.
Mm-hmm. I see. Actually, I would like now to focus on some specific strategies or initiatives. I know that, for example, the MNB published its fintech strategy in October 2019, which since it relates also to the incumbent financial sector, it could also be regarded as a fintech and digitalization strategy. I know that in order to reach certain goals, the MNB created as well this roadmap of 24 initiatives and proposals, including, if I'm not mistaken, 14 initiatives within the MNB and 10 proposals for government and the fintech community. And I know as well that more recently, the MNB also published its annual FinTech and Digitalization report, as well as the MNB's recommendation to the banking industry to set up and implement a digital transformation strategy. So could you please summarize or give us some general ideas about those strategies, and in general about any other strategy related to the MNB's approach towards digitalization?
Yes, with pleasure. So actually, 2019 was the year when a dedicated digitalization area has been established. And in this strategy, we summarized 2 years roadmap, what to achieve within the central bank, and of course, in a lobbying effort at the government or at other related organizations. And yes, sure that these points were directed towards not only the fintechs, but the incumbents as well. And this is quite a broad agenda. So, for example, in 2020 was the year when Hungary launched its instant payment system, which is unique in a way that the participation in the system is obligatory for all the banks. So that one of our main points was to make the instant payment system more popular and to increase adoption. And also one of the points were already here about how to enhance the digital transformation of the local banks. And the work has been finalized in 2021, when in March we issued a very unique central bank recommendation for the banks, and we expected them that by the end of October they were obliged to submit a digital transformation strategy, which in the following 2 or 3 years sets a concrete agenda on how they will strengthen the digitalization. And we wanted to deliver this because we realized that when you talk about digitalization, banks usually think that it's only a front-end issue and they have to develop a fancy mobile application and that's all. And here, in our view, the whole digitalization has to start with a cultural transformation. So all the management and the staff has to embrace digitalization and the new working methods. And for example, one of our points is that we want a dedicated person responsible for digitalization at the board level, so that all the decisions have to have a digitalization flavor, actually. And of course, we urge product and service level digitalization, but of course the most important is the corporate culture that has to be changed. And of course digitalization has to start when the institution is recruiting, and also they constantly have to develop their staff's knowledge, and they have to develop new skills to embrace innovation and to develop partnership with all the innovative fintechs, for example. But we also incentivize to improve the data asset management and risk management, for example. But of course, inevitable the transformation of the corporate IT system as well. So we deem this project quite successful, or all these strategies has been submitted, and we will report soon on what we see and how banks started to go along this way. But we, of course, wanted to have a more organized and more visible fintech sector in Hungary. And one of our points was the aim is to establish a local fintech association, because we missed it, and and the sector was not able to organize themselves. So 2 years ago, a fintech association has been created, and of course they can now be more powerful when talking about government initiatives. They can form association to approach external markets, and of course in a lot of fields they can be more transparent and effective.
And would you say that the pandemic has changed your approach in any way, or would you say that like overall your approach when it comes to those strategies hasn't changed much?
Actually, the central bank approach hasn't really changed, because we already realized before the pandemic that digitalization is a key for the survival of the incumbents, because of the spread of technological innovation, and because of the needs of the new generations to communicate digital only. So what really changed is the bank's behavior and the bank's attitude, because beforehand they deemed digital services as an extra, for example, only for the premium customers. And during the pandemic, they had to change this attitude from one day to the other, and now they realized that they have to offer these services not only for the new generations, but all the customers. So according to our survey, about 80% of the actual customers is open for digital solutions, either omnichannel way or digital only way, so that the demand is here, and the banks the sooner respond to this challenge, the better they compete with all the existing and future providers.
You mentioned before as well the FinTech Association, so I wanted to ask you a bit about the Hungarian FinTech industry. Like, for example, what does it look like? In what areas would you say that Hungary is like stronger from a FinTech perspective?
Actually, when we started to publish our FinTech and Digitalization report, one of the first tasks was to count how many FinTechs are there actively working in Hungary, and it was not easy. And we used web scraping research to find the companies from the web pages, and of course from the text registry. We also had to find who are active and who are submitting reports to the tax authority. And we in our first calculation 2 years ago, we calculated about 110 companies, but in the recent calculation, we already have around 160 companies. So it's a rapidly growing sector, not only by the number of firms, but by the number of employees, because they employ more than 8,000 employees by now, and they are quite profitable. what is usually surprising for credit rating agencies and external partners is that about 90% of these companies are B2B oriented ones, and they are not only looking at the Hungarian market, but they became international very fast. And so that they, in a way, I would say they are very competitive because they are serving global clients like airfare companies or global banks or so. Part of it is explained because they are established by foreign already or operating companies, but of course we have a lot of startups, small and medium-sized enterprises that are the future Hungarian unicorns.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this outlook of the fintech scene in Hungary, as well as all those very interesting ideas on the MNB's digitalization agenda. And now I would like to talk about a topic that I find fascinating, to the point that it's actually one of my main areas of research and specialization right now, and that is central bank digital currencies, or also known as CBDCs. And well, I would like you, if possible, to tell our listeners a bit more about the current status of Hungary's CBDCs and what first results did you obtain?
Well, the famous BIS research says that about 90% of the central banks is actively researching central bank digital currencies, and among them is of course MNB, and we are quite ambitious in this area, and the management wants to be at the forefront of central bank digital currency research. And we also have a unique approach that we have launched several small-scale pilot projects that are not only embracing the CBDC objectives, but they are attached to other objectives like the financial inclusion of primary school students, or the popularization of collector coin registry. And in this way, we run scalable technology research, which can have a start and which can be finished because we have a smaller user group and a dedicated objective, and it's like an MVP level project, and therefore we can collect first-hand experience on how to run a project, how to establish, of course, for example, an online onboarding, customer service, payment engine, how can we communicate with our customers, but it's not a full-scale CBDC where all citizens can access the program, and all merchants has to adopt our proposal, but still we can gain very useful experience. So one of our projects is called the Digital Student Safe application, which has been running since the September 2020, and we have more than 7,000 customers, which means that half of them are the parents of primary school year students, so students from 8 to 14 years old. They can register to the application. They can collect digital stamps, and to gain these stamps they have to fill quizzes in the realm of financial education, digitalization and sustainability. And when they collect different series of these designed stamps, for example, on Hungarian castles or Hungarian kings or Hungarian innovations. They can exchange all these stamps, and in a dedicated redemption period, they can spend it in a special web shop. So in a way, it's not a classic CBDC, but economically it is, because the central bank finances the spending in this web shop. But still, we have a running application. We have all these KYC functions. We have, of course, a backend which runs all the accounts of our young customers, and all the central bank IT operations and other operations are prepared for dealing with such kind of issues, which used to be very far from what central banks usually do.
And you mentioned before as well financial inclusion. So in general, what would be the main advantages for Hungary to launch its own CBDC if that happens in the future?
So actually, when we think about central bank digital currencies, we have our own design framework, and we have to start with the actual market failure or policy objective that would drive the central bank to launch a CBDC. And we haven't formulated any specific issues that would prompt us to do it right now. But when we think about what can it be, financial inclusion, of course, is among the top priorities, because even though the access to bank accounts is around 87–90% of the population, which means that we still have around 10% or 1 million citizens without a bank account. But when we consider the underbanked population, which that is quite broader. So because these bank accounts are not really active, and what is really striking is about 75% of the payment transactions is still made in cash. So that we have quite a job ahead us to transform this to electronic payments. So this really is a strong motivation. And of course, from innovation point of view, what is really interesting us to set up an infrastructure that can pave the way for smart contracts, for all the market-led innovations that can bring value to our citizens and our companies in the future.
And what about the main risks and challenges? Because we all know that CBDCs may have some challenges. So did you identify any?
Of course, there are a lot of challenges along this way, but conceptually, I would highlight one is that we have seen that all other central banks would like to develop the CBDC framework in cooperation with the banking industry. And of course, we would also like to embrace the banks in this project, but still you have to elaborate the motivation framework for this cooperation, because in principle, all these market failures could have been resolved by the banks themselves, so that in an ideal world, the central bank wouldn't need to be intervening into this project. They could offer very cheap bank accounts, they could offer all the digital payments, but they are not doing this. And if we would like to resolve these issues, we have to find out how the banks can partner with us, and how can they offer our product to the customers when this product is actually a competitive product compared to the original ones. So this is the one main concern for us, and what is related to this is the cost structure, because there are a lot of surveys about whether the CBDCs can be popular, and in a recent Giesecke and OMFIF research, we have seen that the CBDC can be attractive in Asian, African countries which are densely populated, with dominated by young population with mobile phones. So in this way, the financial inclusion motivation is quite strong. And when the Giesecke asked the German customers, who can have a very similar thoughts as Hungarians, they would be attracted by CBDC if it were cheap or free of charge. So how can we offer a free account to our customers with the banks to be free of charge? So who will bear these costs, and how can we convince the banks that this is good for them to offer a free CBDC account along their own accounts?
I see. Well, that's a good question. And well, we mentioned before that that work that you did on CBDCs so far has mostly involved like some initial pilot tests. So maybe you don't know this yet, but do you have any idea that well, if eventually launched your CBDC, when would that be? Or maybe you haven't thought about that yet.
So as I mentioned before, we think about small projects that can be expected or scaled up step by step. And our CBDC agenda is based on this Digital Student Safe project, which in the next step, we would like to enhance in a way that it will also involve real money transactions as well. And it will be still a pilot project, and we don't expect that all the possible students and all of their parents would enroll to the program, but we do hope that from the start of the next school year, so September 2022, we will be able to offer them real money in this system, and that will be an actual CBDC.
Awesome. And then you co-authored a book as well, on a book chapter on CBDC design issues, and well, in that chapter you elaborated a three-step decision-making ladder. Could you please let us know which conclusions did you reach in that analysis?
Yes, with pleasure. So actually, we usually talk about CBDCs and CBDC research in all countries, but these CBDCs most probably will be very different products which are resolving very specific market failures or which are solving dedicated policy goals. So in our decision-making letter, we put the fundamental goal to be decided as the first step in the roadmap to launch a CBDC. So like, as we mentioned before, it can be financial inclusion or backup infrastructure for natural catastrophes, or to reduce shadow economy, or to react to the rise of alternative payment platforms. So you have to be very decisive on what motivates you. And when this is fixed, then you can move ahead, and you can decide on to whom you will offer accessibility. So we are not thinking about a universal program per se. It can be either school year students, or it can be like those in need, those who are underbanked, or these in specific cases can be either municipalities or SMEs or dedicated customer groups. Then you have to think about the monetary policy nature, whether you want a deliberately effective, neutral, or flexible system. So these are more or less independent decisions. But when they are fixed, they are driving you to the path to fix some other points, like what form of money you would like to replace cash or bank account money. And then you have to decide on who will participate in the system, and what role the central bank should play, and what role other partners like commercial banks can play. And of course, the very pertinent issue of anonymity has to be decided. So whether you would be allowed to have completely anonymous transactions, or you can have also a flexible system. And finally, you can decide on the technology, whether you would embrace the new DLT-based technologies, which can enable further technological innovation, or you would like to have a safe bet on the traditional infrastructure, which can be probably more easily implemented, but of course, which limits the future expansion and the future developments. So these are the main main points, and we do believe this is the correct order how you can set up a really consistent and workable system.
Well, these, I mean, your remarks are all very interesting, but I think this part where you talked about technology is especially interesting, where you talked about whether to use or not DLT-based technologies. And I would like, of course, to dig deeper into that, but well, because of time constraints, I'll need to move forward to the last question of my list. But still, I think it's good that you mentioned that thing about that DLTs. And well, when you are talking now, you mentioned as well the idea of alternative payment platforms. So that's why, before wrapping this discussion up, I wanted to ask you about cryptocurrencies. As I always mention to people who read my articles or study my courses, CBDCs, to me and to most people, are not cryptocurrencies because of many reasons. One of them, maybe the most obvious one, being the fact that a CBDC is going to be issued, launched by a central bank, whereas a cryptocurrency is actually the opposite. Its rationale is precisely the idea of being the flagship of this decentralized finance DeFi movement. So, taking into consideration as well that, if I'm not mistaken, the MNB is the first central bank in the European Union to have sustainability as a declared mandate for the central bank to support. Could you please let me and our listeners know a bit more about the MNB's view on cryptocurrencies?
So indeed, as you mentioned, MNB got firstly among the European Central Bank dedicated mandate to support the government efforts towards environmental sustainability with all the central bank needs. And digitalization and sustainability are the two key areas where the central bank would like to move really fast. And in cryptocurrency research, we have seen quite strong arguments that this direction doesn't really support sustainability. Of course, especially the proof of work mechanism, which is quite energy intense and which even if is fueled by new energy sources. These new sustainable energy sources should replace the traditional energy sources and not used by creating cryptocurrencies. So the central bank overall is very concerned about the ecological footprint of cryptocurrencies, and therefore we would be very happy if all this cryptocurrency mining would be outside of the European Union overall. But the Union doesn't really move into this direction, so the MiCA regulation is looming, and it's soon adopted by the European Parliament. But still, what we would urge in this field, it should be really strongly regulated, so all the customers have to be aware of the risks, has to be aware of the price volatility, has to be aware of the possibility of losing the investment, not because of the value movement, but because of the ambiguities in the storing procedures. And so we just do believe that the promises of this new regulation will calm all these worries, and what we see would be a valid, quite risk-sensitive framework, which gives regulation behind the already existing market, but we don't really see the need to expand it so much.
Well, thank you very much for sharing these very interesting thoughts on this topic. And well, actually, thank you for sharing your thoughts on all the areas that we've been covering in the last almost 40 minutes. Unfortunately, our discussion needs to come to an end. So I would like to thank you again for your time and well, for your willingness to discuss all these very interesting topics. Thank you very much, Anikó.
Thank you for approaching me.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and well, to all my listeners, please stay tuned for the next episodes. See you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.